There was a fence at the edge of the king's forest that no wolf in the north would cross, and the woman who owned it did not know why. She knew that it was true. Everyone knew it was true. For as long as anyone in the valley could remember, the farms up and down the valley had lost lambs and calves and the odd careless goat to the wolves every winter, the way you lose things to winter, and every one of them had lost stock except the one farm that sat closest of all to the trees, hers, where the wolves came right up to the fence line in the snow, and stopped, and turned around, and went to trouble someone else. Maud had lived her whole life behind that fence, and had never lost a single animal to a single wolf. She thought about it the way you think about the weather, a fact of the place, not a thing that needed explaining. Her mother had kept the farm before her, and never lost a beast either. That was simply how their land was. And then, one grey morning in the deep of winter, a man rode up out of the trees to find out why, and he was not just any man, and after that morning nothing on Maud's quiet land was ever quiet again. Chapter 1. The Fence. Maud was mending the fence when he came, which she would later think was fitting, because the fence turned out to be the whole of it. It was hard, cold work in hard, cold weather. A post had rotted at the base and gone crooked, and she had it half dug out and was swearing at the frozen ground in a low, steady way when she heard the horse. She didn't look up. People rode the valley road all the time, and a woman who looks up at every rider gets no fence mended. The horse stopped. "You're on my land," Maud said, still not looking up, because she could feel it had stopped at her, and a rider who stops at you wants something, and she'd found it was best to establish whose land it was before the wanting started. "I'm aware of whose land I'm on. Then you'll know the way off it. Same way you came." There was a pause, the particular pause of a man not used to being spoken to like that. Maud went on levering at the post. "Do you know who I am?" the man said. And here Maud did look up, because there's only one kind of man who asks that, and she wanted to see him. He was big. Even on the horse she could tell he was big, with dark hair and a hard, clean face and a way of sitting still that most men don't have, and eyes that were watching her far too closely for a stranger at a fence. He wore good plain clothes and no crown, but he didn't need the crown. She'd seen his face before, stamped small on the coins that came through the market, and larger in the way people lowered their voices when they spoke of him. The Lycan King of the North, at her fence, watching her dig a post. A big man, Maud said, who came a long way to stand at a fence and bother a woman doing an honest day's work. Whether you're more than that is between you and your horse. "I'm the King of the North." "Congratulations," said Maud, and went back to the post. She heard him dismount. That surprised her. She'd half expected him to be offended and ride off, which would have suited her, because a king taking an interest in you is never good news. It only ever means your quiet life is about to become someone else's business. Instead, there were boots in the snow, coming to the other side of the fence, and then the King of the North was standing over her while she knelt in the cold mud with her hands around a rotten post. "Hold that rail steady," Maud said, before he could speak. "Since you're standing there being important, it'll come out cleaner if it's not wobbling." And the Lycan King of the North, who had not held a fence rail for another living soul in the whole of his reign, looked down at the rail, and looked down at the woman, and, for reasons he could not have explained to his council, to his wolves, or to himself, reached down and held the rail steady. The post came out clean. "There," said Maud. "Some use after all. Now. What does the King of the North want with my fence? Because you didn't ride out of those trees at dawn for the pleasure of my conversation, charming as it is. Rolled, for that was his name, though she didn't have it yet, straightened and looked out across her land, the small, tidy farm sitting in its bowl of snow, with the great dark forest rising all around it, and when he spoke, his voice had changed. It had gone careful. "My wolves won't hunt here," he said. "On your land. They won't cross this fence. As far back as the pack's memory runs, they never have, and I want to know why." "So does everyone in the valley," said Maud. "Join the queue? They've been calling me Lucky my whole life, and Lucky's the polite word. There's a less polite word, and they use that one too, when they think I can't hear. You don't know why, either. I know my mother never lost a beast, and neither have I. I know the wolves come to the fence and go away again. I don't know why, and I'll be honest with you. King of the North. She leaned on the new post, testing it. I never much wanted to know. A thing that's kept my lambs alive my whole life. I don't go poking at it to see how it works. You don't ask a gift to explain itself. It's not luck, Roald said. You keep saying what it's not. Because I know what it's not. Luck doesn't turn a hunting pack at a fence line. Nothing turns a hunting pack. Not weather, not fire, not me. And I'm their king. They answer to me before they answer to their own hunger. But they won't answer to me here. He looked at her, and there was something under the careful voice now, something that was almost unease. There is one thing in the world that can turn my wolves against my own command, and it is not luck, and it is on your land. So I'll ask you plainly, what did your mother do? And Maud opened her mouth to say she didn't know, and stopped, because she did know one thing, one small thing she'd never told anyone, never thought worth telling, a thing so folded into the shape of her life that she'd stopped seeing it. She left them something, Maud said slowly. My mother. Twice a year. On 2 nights. I never knew which nights until she woke me for them. She'd take a portion out to the edge of the trees. Good meat, the best we had, when we'd little enough for ourselves. She'd leave it at a particular stone and say some words I never learned, and we'd go back inside. And in the morning it was gone, and we never spoke of it. Maud frowned, hearing herself, hearing how strange it sounded now that she said it aloud for the first time in her life. I thought it was just a thing she did, her way. Everyone's mother has their ways. I've kept it up since she died, because it felt wrong not to. But I don't know the words, and I don't know the right nights. I just guess. I do the best I can with a thing I was never properly taught. The King of the North had gone very still. You've been keeping it up, he said. The offering. Guessing at it. For 8 years, since she passed. Why? Because that, said Roald, and he was looking at her now, the way you look at something that has turned out to be far more than you thought it was, is the oldest thing my people have, and I did not know a single soul in the North still did it. It has a name. What your mother was doing has a name, and it is not a small thing. And the fact that you have been doing it, half-taught and guessing for 8 years, and it has held... He stopped. Show me the stone. It's getting dark soon. Show me the stone, Maud. She hadn't told him her name. She noticed it, filed it, decided to be unsettled about it later. And because there was something in his voice now that wasn't a king ordering a subject, that was closer to a man who'd been looking for something a long time and had just heard it move in the next room. She wiped her hands on her apron and picked up her lantern and said, Fine. But you're carrying the fence tools back, since you're so keen to be useful. This way. Chapter 2. The Ones Who Won't Cross. The stone sat at the edge of her land, where the pasture gave way to the trees. An old grey standing stone, half sunk in the earth, worn smooth on its top surface in a way that might have been weather, and might not. Maud had known it her whole life. She'd never once thought to ask how a standing stone came to be at the exact line the wolves would not cross. Roald crouched at it in the failing light and put his hand flat on the worn place and was quiet for a long moment. Here, he said. You leave it here. On the stone, yes. And the words. You said your mother said words. I don't know them. I told you. I was a girl. I half heard them. She died before she... Maud stopped. That was closer to a wound than she meant to go with a stranger, even a royal one. She died before she finished teaching me. That's the whole of it. She got sick the winter I was 15, and she went fast, and there was a great deal she meant to tell me and didn't, and the words at the stone were one of them. So I say what feels right, and I hope it's enough. It seems to be enough. The wolves still turn. For now, Roald said quietly, and didn't explain that, and she didn't like the sound of it. He stood. He looked out at the tree line where the dark was gathering, and he did a thing then that Maud would remember for the rest of her life. He spoke to the forest. Not loudly, in a low voice, in a shape of sound that wasn't quite words, the voice of a man speaking to something that was his. A command, she understood, a summoning, the king of the north calling his wolves to prove a point. And the wolves came. They came out of the dark between the trees, grey and silent, more of them than she'd ever seen at once, a dozen, and then more, flowing down toward the fence line like water finding a level. Maud's breath caught. Not in fear, exactly. She'd lived beside them too long for simple fear, but in the presence of something large and wild and close. They reached the fence, and they lay down, every one of them. On the far side of her fence, in the snow, chins on their paws, watching the king of the north with the mild, patient attention of animals waiting for a man to finish being wrong about something. Roald spoke again, sharper. The command to cross. Not one wolf moved. There, he started, and for the first time since he'd ridden out of her trees, the king of the north seemed to be at a loss. Tired? Maud offered. He shot her a look, and it was at that exact moment that the largest wolf of the lot, an enormous old grey male, broad as a pony across the shoulders, heaved himself up, walked along the fence to where Maud stood on her own side of it, put his great head over the top rail and into her free hand, and, having greeted her, lay down again at her feet with a long, contented sigh. On her side of the fence, the only wolf in the whole north who would cross it, and he'd crossed it to lie at the feet of the woman, not at the command of the king. The silence stretched. "He's not tired," said Maud, scratching the old wolf's ear, because she couldn't help herself, and because the look on the king's face was, frankly, worth a great deal. "He's just got better manners than his master. Haven't you?" The wolf thumped his tail against the snow. Roald looked at the animal. His animal. One of his own pack, lying at a farm woman's feet and ignoring the direct command of its king. And then he looked at Maud, and something happened in his face that she couldn't read, and that she'd spend a good many nights afterward trying to. "Generations," he said, half to himself. "I thought it was a curiosity, a story, a patch of ground the pack disliked. I rode out here to put a small, strange thing to rest." He shook his head slowly. "It's not small. A king whose wolves obey another authority on his own land isn't a king with a curiosity. He's a king with a crack in the middle of everything. If there's one fence in the north, my pack answers before they answer me, then I need to know what put it there, and who holds it, and whether it can be—" He stopped himself. "Whether it can be what?" said Maud. "Widened," Roald said, "by someone who isn't as friendly to the north as you are." Maud was quiet at that. She hadn't thought of it that way. She'd thought of the fence as her good luck, her mother's gift, a private thing. She had never once thought of it as a thing with power in it. Power that a king would covet and an enemy might want. Power sitting unguarded and half understood in the hands of a woman who mended it with rotten posts and guessed at the words. "You'd best come inside," she heard herself say. "It's dark, and it's cold. And if you're going to tell me my whole life is standing on top of something I don't understand, I'd rather hear it sitting down, with bread in my hand. You'd feed the king who just tried to send wolves across your fence?" "I'd feed anyone who held my fence rail steady," said Maud. "Even a king. Even one who's clearly going to be a great deal of trouble. Come on, and bring the tools, and—" She looked down at the enormous grey wolf at her feet, who showed no sign whatever of leaving. "I suppose he's coming too." The wolf got up and followed her toward the house. The king of the north picked up the fence tools, which he had somehow been reduced to carrying, and followed the wolf. Inside, she sat him at her table and put bread in front of him and stew after it, and watched, with some private satisfaction, the way the most powerful man in the north ate a farm woman's supper, like he'd forgotten food could be a plain good thing instead of a ceremony. He ate the way tired men eat when no one's watching. Except she was watching, and he knew it. And he slowed down and tried to be dignified about it. And she let him think he'd managed. "You don't eat like a king," she observed. "How does a king eat?" "Slowly, suspiciously, like the food might be part of a plot." She refilled his cup. You eat like a man who's hungry and hasn't let himself notice in a while. Roald looked at her over the cup. That's a great deal to read off a bowl of stew. I feed people for a living. You learn to read them off a bowl of stew. She sat down across from him, and the great wolf arranged himself over her feet like a warm, heavy blanket. And for a moment, the strangeness of it struck her. The king of the north at her table, his own wolf on her feet, the winter dark pressed against the windows and the fire holding it off. This is going to turn my whole quiet life upside down, isn't it? You, the bargain. All of it. Almost certainly, said Roald. At least you're honest about it. I find I'm honest with you, he said, and seemed a little surprised to hear himself say it. I don't know why. I'm not, as a rule. It's not a thing kings can afford. But you told me to hold a fence rail, and I held it. And I haven't quite known which way is up since, so... Yes. Honest. It's disconcerting. I'll probably get over it. Don't, said Maud, before she could think better of it. He didn't answer that. But something passed between them across the table, quick and warm and gone again, and the wolf on her feet sighed as though satisfied about something. And that was the first day. Chapter 3, The Half-Taught Rite. He came back the next morning. Maud told herself she wasn't surprised, and told herself she wasn't glad, and was wrong on both counts. She was hanging washing in the bitter early light when she heard the horse, and something in her chest did a small, ridiculous thing that she crushed immediately, because she was a grown woman with a farm to run and no time for whatever that was. You're back, she said. There's a mystery on your land, Roald said, dismounting. It's a matter of sovereignty. A matter of sovereignty? At my washing line? At dawn? Yes. Nothing to do with the bread. The king of the north paused. A man caught out. The bread was very good, he admitted, with the grave dignity of a man confessing to a crime. I know it was. I made it. Maud pegged up a shirt and did not smile, which took effort. Well, if you're going to keep turning up, you can make yourself useful again. You said what my mother did has a name. So sit down, King of the North, and tell me the name of the thing I've been doing blind for 8 years. I've a right to know what I'm standing on. So he told her. They sat at her kitchen table. The enormous grey wolf, who had not left, arranged across the whole of the hearth like a rug that breathed. And Roald told her the oldest thing his people had. There is a... He searched for the word in her tongue. A lord of wolves. Older than kings. Older than my line. The pack answers to their king. Yes, to me. But underneath that, older than that, they answer to him. And the belief my people carried, back and back as far as the stories go, is that no wolf takes an animal from a household's herd unless the Lord of Wolves permits it. That if you kept faith with him, left the offering, said the words, at the turning of the seasons, he would hold his wolves back from your beasts. And if you forgot him, if you let the right lapse, he would take offence, and he would send the whole pack down on your herd to remind you. Roald turned his cup slowly. It was old when my grandfather was young. I thought it was dead. Nobody keeps it now. The North forgot the Lord of Wolves and just started killing wolves instead, which is cheaper and needs no faith. And yet here you are. One farm, one woman, still keeping the oldest bargain in the North, half-taught, at a stone, and it has held generation after generation. Maud sat with that. So the wolves don't come, she said slowly, because my mother, and her mother before her, I suppose, and back, kept faith with this Lord of Wolves, and he holds them off my land, as his side of the bargain. That's the shape of it, and I've been keeping it up wrong, guessing the nights, not knowing the words. She felt something cold move through her. You said it's held, but you also said at the stone. For now. What did you mean, for now? Roald was quiet for a moment, and she was learning that his quiet moments were the ones to be frightened of. A bargain kept half-right holds, he said, until it's tested. You've been fortunate. The offering half-made has been enough, because nothing's come to lean on it. But these things turn on their proper nights. There's a renewal. a season when the bargain must be remade in full, or it lapses. And a lapsed bargain doesn't just fade, it breaks. And a broken bargain with the Lord of Wolves isn't generations of quiet going quietly away. It's generations of held-back hunger arriving at your fence in a single night, because he doesn't take offense gently. He looked at her. When did your mother make the big offering? Not the small twice-a-year one, the great one. There'd have been a great one at the turn, a proper night, more than meat, words you say only then. And Maud, cold now, said, I don't know. I don't. She died in the winter. Maybe she did the great one, and I don't remember. I was 15, and she was dying. The whole winter's a blur of... She stopped. I don't know if it's been made at all since she died. I've done the little offerings. I never knew there was a great one. Then the great rite hasn't been made properly in generations, said Roald quietly, and it's finally running out. Here's the shape of it. The small offerings, the ones your mother made, and her mother, and you these 8 years. Those aren't the whole bargain. They're the year-to-year keeping. Each one strengthens what's left of the old binding, carries it a little further. But they're only half the faith, the great renewal, the true one that remakes the whole thing at its root, that hasn't been done in a very long time. The small keeping has been carrying a neglected binding on its own, and it can only carry it so far. 9 winters, near enough, is the limit of what the lesser rite can hold before the whole thing must be sworn again in full. He looked at the fire. Your mother made the last small offering of the cycle shortly before she died. Every offering you've made since has kept it alive through the 8 winters after. This is the 9th. That's why it's straining now and wasn't last winter. It's reached the end of what the small keeping can sustain. I can feel it in the pack. That's why they're restless at your fence. That's why I rode out. The true renewal is close. Weeks, I'd guess no more. And if the great rite isn't made properly, on the right night, with the right words, which I don't have. Which you don't have, he agreed. The fire cracked. The great wolf sighed in his sleep. So let me understand you, said Maud, and her voice was steady, even though the rest of her wasn't. You came here about your sovereignty, your crack in the middle of everything. But what you've actually told me is that in a few weeks, a bargain I didn't know I was keeping is going to come due, and I don't know how to keep it. And if I fail, every wolf you own comes through my fence and takes everything I have in one night. That's not a matter of your sovereignty, King. That's my whole life. I know, said Roald. So what do we do about it? And the King of the North looked at her across her own kitchen table and said the thing that changed the shape of everything, though neither of them knew it yet. We find out what your mother knew, he said. Together. You know the land and the stone and what's left of the right. I know the wolves and the old ways and what the words are meant to do. Neither of us can remake this bargain alone. But between the two of us? He almost smiled. Between the two of us, we might just have one whole keeper of the oldest faith in the North. I'll stay until it's done. You'll stay. On your land, yes. The King of the North is going to live on my farm and help me remember my dead mother's magic before your wolves eat my sheep. That's an unkind way to put it, but yes. Maud looked at him for a long moment. At the enormous grey wolf on her hearth. At the fence outside her window, holding back the whole wild North because a woman she'd half forgotten had once kept faith with something older than the crown. You can sleep in the barn, she said, kings included. And you're mending the rest of that fence while you're here, since it's apparently the most important fence in the North, and it's held together with rot and hope. I'm the king of the... You're a man on my land eating my bread, said Maud. And on my land, everyone works. Barn's through there. Mind the wolf. And that, though she'd have denied it with her last breath, was the morning Maud stopped wanting him to leave. Chapter 4. What the Mother Knew. They worked at it for days. It was slow and strange, and she'd never have admitted this to a living soul. It was the best time Maud had had in 8 years, because the work of remembering her mother turned out to be the work of finally, properly grieving her, and she'd never done it. Not really. She'd been 15, and then she'd been busy, and there'd been a farm to save, and no time to sit in the loss of the woman. And now, here was a reason to sit in it. To walk the land her mother walked, and stand at the stone her mother stood at, and dredge up every half-buried memory of the nights she'd been woken and led out into the cold, and hold each one up to the light with a man who knew what the pieces meant. She faced the trees, Maud remembered, standing at the stone in the blue dusk. Not the house, the trees. And she put the meat down with her right hand, always the right. She'd have my hand slapped away if I reached with the left. The right hand's the giving hand in the old rite, Roald said. The left takes. You offer with the right, so the Lord knows it's a gift and not a trade. Good. What else? What did she wear? Wear? I don't... And then she did. Grey. She had a grey cloak she only wore those nights. I thought it was just her warm one. She put it away the rest of the year. Grey for the pack. She was telling him she came as one of his, not as a stranger. Your mother knew this right deep, Maud. This wasn't a woman guessing. Someone taught her whole and well. Roald looked at her. Which means someone could have taught you. She meant to. She ran out of time. That's all that went wrong here. Time. It went on like that for hours, most nights. The two of them at the stone or at the kitchen table, dredging and fitting. And it was maddening and slow. And Maud found she looked forward to it, the way she'd once looked forward to nothing at all. He was a good partner in the work. She'd give him that. He didn't rush her. When a memory wouldn't come, he'd go quiet and let her sit with it, instead of filling the silence, which was a rarer thing in a man than it should have been. And he had a dry way about him, once she'd cracked him open a little, that caught her off guard. Your mother slapped your hand for reaching with the left, he said once, and you turned out like this. Imagine if she'd had the full raising of you. Like what? Turned out like what? Ordering kings about? Feeding wolves off your hearth? Taking down a man's whole sense of himself with a remark about bread? You keep bringing up the bread. It was very good bread. I think about it. It's undignified, how much I think about the bread. You could just say you like being here, said Maud, before she'd decided to. And the words sat in the cold air between them, too honest. And she busied herself with the lantern. Roald was quiet a moment. I like being here, he said. Simply, not a joke. And Maud didn't have anything clever for that, so she said nothing. And the not saying was louder than anything either of them could have said. And Maud, to her horror, found her eyes stinging one evening, and turned away to face the trees so he wouldn't see. He saw. Of course he saw. He was a wolf. He saw everything. You didn't get to know her, he said. It wasn't a question. I was 15. You know a mother when you're 15 the way you know weather. She was just there, and then she wasn't, and I never got the part where she becomes a person to you instead of just your mother. I never got to ask her anything real. And now I'm standing here learning who she was from a stranger, from what she wore to feed wolves in the dark. And it turns out she was... Maud's voice cracked, and she hated it. She was keeping the oldest faith in the North alive by herself, holding the whole wild forest off this farm. And she never told me because she thought she had time. And I've been calling it luck for 8 years. My mother's life's work. And I called it luck. The King of the North was quiet a moment. And then he did a thing that no one had done for Maud in a very long time, which was not try to fix it. He just came and stood beside her, at the stone, facing the trees, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold, and said, Then let's do her work properly. Let's remake her bargain right, on the right night, the way she'd have taught you if the winter had been kinder. That's not luck. That's you finishing what she started. She'd know it was you. The Lord of Wolves will know it was her daughter's hand. Maud wiped her face with the back of her hand and didn't bother hiding it any more. That's a very good speech, she said, wobbling, for a man who slept in my barn last night. I've had time to prepare it. The barn is very cold, and I wasn't sleeping. She laughed, wet and surprised, and caught him looking at her when she did. The long look, the one with a temperature in it, the one she was starting to feel across a room like standing near a fire. And this time, she didn't look away fast, and neither did he, and the dusk got very quiet around them, and the great grey wolf, sitting a little way off, watched the two of them with what looked remarkably like satisfaction. "We should go in," Maud said, not moving. "Yes," said Roald, not moving. Neither of them went in for a while. And out past the fence, in the dark of the trees, more wolves than usual had gathered to watch the farm. Not restless now, not straining, but drawn. The whole pack pulled toward that one lit farmhouse, and the two people standing at the old grey stone, as if something the wolves had been waiting a very long time for had finally started to happen. Roald felt them there. He didn't tell Maud. But he stood at the stone with the farm woman in the dark, and felt his entire pack watching them with held breath, and he began to suspect, with a slow, unking-like lurch of the heart, that the crack in the middle of his sovereignty and the woman he did not want to ride away from were going to turn out to be exactly the same thing. He was right, but he didn't have the whole of it yet. That came 3 nights later, when they found out who had made the bargain in the first place. Chapter 5. The Older Promise. It was the wolf who showed them, in the end. The great, grey male. Maud had started calling him Ash, for the colour and for the way he lay in the hearth-ashes, and he'd accepted the name with the grace of a creature who'd always had it. Led them to it. 3 nights after the stone, he wouldn't settle. He paced the kitchen, went to the door, came back, went to the door, until Maud let him out, and he didn't run for the trees. He walked the fence line, slow, deliberate, looking back to see if they followed, until he came to a place where the old dry stone wall that ran beneath the wooden fence had tumbled. And there, among the fallen stones, half-buried, worn nearly smooth, was a flat grey slab with marks cut into it. Roald knelt and cleared the snow and the earth with his bare hands, and went very still. "What is it?" Maud said. "What does it say?" "It's a boundary stone. The old kind. They set them where a bargain was made, to mark the ground the bargain covers." He traced the worn marks. "These are old. Older than your mother. Older than her mother. This is the stone that was set when the bargain was first struck, and it has both marks on it. Both sides." He looked up at her. "A bargain has 2 sides, Maud. Your line kept faith and made the offerings. That's your side. But someone had to hold the wolves back in return. Someone had to be the Lord of Wolves who agreed to it. And his mark is here, cut next to your foremothers, because a bargain like this is sworn by both and marked by both." "So whose is it, the other mark?" Roald was quiet for a long moment, looking at the mark cut into the stone beside the mark of Maud's foremothers. And when he spoke, his voice had gone strange. "It's mine," he said. "What?" "Not mine, my line's. This is the old mark of the Lords of the North, the Wolf Kings, my blood, back and back. It's on my own hall. It's on my grandfather's grave." He sat back on his heels in the snow. "And this form of it, the way it's cut here, the old way, I know it. It's the mark of Eric, the first of my line, the founder. It hasn't been struck like this in 800 years. No one's used it since him." He touched it. "The bargain wasn't made between your foremother and some nameless Lord of Wolves out of a story. It was made between your line and mine, 800 years ago at the founding. Eric himself, a wolf king, a real man, standing where I'm standing, swore this with a woman of your blood, and set his mark next to hers in this stone, and bound the crown of the North to hold its wolves back from this ground forever, in exchange for the offerings your mothers have made ever since." Maud sank down in the snow beside him. "Then it's not just my mother's," she said slowly. "It's not just my family's strange gift. It's yours too. Your crown's been keeping this bargain as long as my family has. You've been holding your wolves back from my land for as long as there's been a North, and I didn't know. The knowledge stayed in your line, in the offerings, in the women who kept it. In mine it was lost. My family forgot we'd sworn it, the way I told you the North forgot the Lord of Wolves altogether. We just stopped being told. But the pack never forgot. That's what you've been seeing all your life, Maud. That's why they won't cross. It isn't only your mother's faith holding them. It's my own blood's oldest promise, still binding them, long after my family forgot we ever made it." He laughed, short and disbelieving. "I came here thinking there was a rival authority on my land, and the rival authority is me. It's my own sworn word, kept by everyone but me." He looked at Ash then, the great grey wolf sitting patient in the snow beside the stone, watching the two of them with those steady amber eyes. And something dawned in Roald's face. "He's the reason I never quite believed the fence was nothing," Roald said slowly. "He crossed it, that first day. The only wolf in the north who would. And I couldn't understand it. A wolf breaking the boundary the whole pack won't touch. But he wasn't breaking it, Maud. He was answering it. The oldest wolf of the pack always stands witness to the renewal. It's his place in the bargain, older than any of us, passed down the pack the way the offering passed down your line. He crossed because it was his to cross. He came to you because the keeper was who he'd been waiting for. He found this stone because he stood at it before, in his grandsire's memory, further back than either of us can go." He shook his head. "He's been trying to lead us here since the first morning. We just weren't listening. The pack remembered its half of the faith when both our families forgot theirs entirely." Ash thumped his tail once against the snow, as if to say, "Finally." They sat in the snow together, at the stone that bore both their marks, and the size of it settled over them. "There's more," Roald said finally, and his voice had changed again, gone careful in the way she'd learned to dread. "If the bargain was sworn between our two lines, then the renewal, the great right, the one that's coming due. Maud, it was never meant to be one woman alone at a stone with a bowl of meat. That's the small keeping. The half your mother could do alone, year to year. But the great renewal, the one that remakes the whole bargain at the turn, that takes both sides, both lines, the keeper of the faith and the lord of the wolves, present, together, both hands on it." He looked at her. "Your mother did the small rite alone for years, because there was no wolf king who remembered to stand with her. She did the half that one person can do. But the great renewal that's coming due, the 9th turn rite, the one your mother's last keeping began, and your offerings have carried through these 8 winters, the one that breaks if it's not remade. That one can't be done by you alone. It never could. It needs both of us. It needs the Lord of Wolves to come and stand at the stone in person and swear it again, with the keeper, hand to hand." The night was very quiet. "So that's why the pack's watching us," Maud said, understanding. "That's why they're drawn to the farm now and weren't before. Because for the first time in... how long? Generations, maybe ever since the first one. For the first time in generations, both sides of their oldest bargain are standing on the same ground at the same time. The keeper and the wolf king. Us. Us, Roald said. And there it was, the thing that had been building at the edges of every day since the first morning at her fence. Out in the open now, in the snow, between them. Too big to keep pretending about. Because the great rite was a binding. That was what the word meant, under all the ceremony. 2 lines, sworn together, hand to hand, at the turn of the year, the keeper of the land and the lord of the wolves bound into one promise. It had always, underneath everything, been a kind of marriage, a marriage between the wolves and the land, worn down over the generations into a woman alone with a bowl of meat because the other side stopped coming. And now the other side had come. "When you say the great rite is a binding," Maud said carefully, not looking at him, looking at the stone, "how much of a binding are we talking about exactly?" "The old kind," said Roald, equally carefully, equally not looking at her. "The kind that doesn't come undone. Between the keeper and the wolf king." "Yes." "Between me and you." "Yes," said Roald. And the 2 of them sat in the snow at the stone that bore both their marks, and did not look at each other, and were both, very quietly, terrified. Not of the wolves, not of the breaking bargain, but of the thing that had been true since the first morning at the fence, and now had a name and a stone and 800 years of the north behind it. Ash, the great grey wolf, put his head between the two of them, and looked from one to the other, and made a low sound that in any other creature Maud would have sworn was a laugh. Chapter 6. The Moon. They had 11 days until the turn, and they spent them not talking about the one thing, and talking about it constantly without words. The work gave them cover. There was the right to reconstruct. The full one now, the great renewal, and between Maud's buried memories and Roald's knowledge of the old ways and the marks on the boundary stone, it came together piece by piece. The grey cloak, the right hand, the words, which Roald knew the shape of and Maud's memory filled in, her mother's voice surfacing out of 8 years of grief, a phrase at a time, until between them they had the whole of it. And underneath the work, the other thing grew. It was in every ordinary moment now. When he handed her a tool, their hands stayed touching a beat too long. When she leaned past him at the stone to point at a mark, she felt him go still, felt his breath change. He'd taken to watching her work, with an attention that had stopped being about the right, and she'd caught herself finding reasons to stand close to him, to hand him things, to make him hold the fence rail again, just to see the way he did it now. Not as a king humouring a farm woman, but as a man who'd do anything she asked and had stopped pretending otherwise. He'd moved out of the barn by then, not into her bed, not yet, not with the right hanging over them, and both of them too aware of what the right was, but into the house, onto a pallet by the hearth beside Ash, because the barn was cold, and the pretence of a king sleeping in her barn had stopped fooling anyone, least of all the wolf, who had taken to lying pointedly between the pallet and Maud's door each night, with the air of a chaperone who did not trust either party. "Your wolf doesn't trust us," Maud said one night, stepping over him. "My wolf has better sense than I do. I've been reliably informed. By you. About the both of them." Roald was lying on his back, watching the fire, hands behind his head, and in the low light with the day's care off his face, he looked younger, easier, like the man he might have been if he'd never had a crown. "He's not guarding you from me, though." "No. He's making sure I don't do anything before the turn that we haven't earned yet. He's very traditional. It's the bargain. He wants it done right." He turned his head and looked at her across the fire-lit room. "So do I. I want it done right, Maud. When we—" He stopped and started again, and it cost him something. "I've had things done to me my whole life for what I am. The crown, alliances, people wanting the king. I don't want the stone to be one more thing that happens to me. I want to walk into it wanting it. Both of us. Not because we have to, because we'd choose it with no stone at all." Maud stood in the middle of her own kitchen, with her heart doing the ridiculous thing it had been doing since the first morning, and she did not trust her voice. So she crossed the room and sat down on the edge of his pallet, over Ash's grumbled objection. And she took the King of the North's face in her hand, the giving hand, the right one, she noticed later. And she said, "Then it's a good thing there's no stone tonight, isn't there?" Roald caught her wrist, held it against his own face. His eyes had gone dark. "Maud, I'm not going to kiss you," she said. "Ash would have opinions. And you're right, we should wait for the turn, do it properly, all of that. I just wanted you to know," her thumb moved along his cheekbone, "that I'd choose it with no stone at all, since you said it. Since you were brave enough to say it first. There. Now we've both said it. And we can be sensible for 10 more days. And you can stop looking at me like that, or I won't answer for either of us." "Like what?" said Roald, not stopping. "Like the wolves look at me. Like you've decided and it can't be undone." "That's exactly what it is," he said. "That's the whole of what it is." And Ash the wolf made a long, low sound of profound disapproval, and physically shoved his great body between them, until Maud, laughing, got up and went to her own bed, and lay awake most of the night on one side of a wall, knowing the King of the North was awake on the other side of it, both of them counting down the days with an impatience that had nothing to do with breaking bargains and everything to do with the turn of a moon that could not come fast enough. One evening, on the 10th day, a lone rogue came down out of the high country. a gaunt stranger from beyond the northern ridge, driven mad with winter hunger, and made for Maud's sheep. It crossed the fence without slowing. "Not mine," Roald said, already moving, outside the oath. And then the rogue caught Maud's movement by the pen and turned, sharp, sudden, away from the sheep and toward her. Roald was between them before she'd finished drawing breath, faster than a man should move, a low sound coming out of him that raised the hair on her arms. And the rogue took one look at whatever was in the King of the North's face and fled back into the dark. And Roald turned around, and his eyes were not quite a man's, and he was breathing hard, and he looked at Maud with a raw, unguarded thing in his face that had nothing to do with sovereignty at all. "You're all right," he said. It wasn't a question. He crossed to her and took her by the shoulders, hands running down her arms as if checking she was whole. "It didn't reach you. I'm fine. Roald, I'm fine. It didn't get near me. You were..." She was holding on to his arms now, both of them, and neither of them had decided to. "You were very fast. It was going for you." His voice was rough. "I saw it turn toward you and I stopped thinking. I've never..." He stopped. His hands were on her arms and hers were on his, and they were very close in the cold dark, and the great wolf had discreetly wandered off, and there was no reason on earth to keep standing like this, except the one enormous reason. "Maud, if you're going to be sensible," Maud said unsteadily, "about the binding and the crown and the farm woman and the king, now would be the time, because in a moment I'm not going to be able to..." "I don't want to be sensible," said the King of the North. "I've been sensible for my whole reign. I came to your fence about my sovereignty, and I have spent 11 days discovering that the oldest promise of my blood is a binding to your line, sworn in stone, waiting 800 years for the two people standing in it to finally arrive. If that's not permission to stop being sensible, I don't know what would be." "That's a very good speech. I've had 11 days to..." She kissed him. She kissed the King of the North at the edge of her land in the dark, and he made a sound against her mouth, like something breaking open after a long freeze. And his arms came around her and lifted her clean off her feet, and 800 years of a bargain worn down to a woman alone with a bowl of meat came back to life all at once. In the snow, between the two people it had always been waiting for. "The rights in a day," she managed against his mouth. "We're supposed to... The binding's supposed to be at the turn. We shouldn't..." "The binding's a formality," Roald said into her hair, and she could hear the smile in it, the first full, unguarded smile she'd felt on him. "The stone's just catching up to what's already true. It's been true since you told me to hold your fence rail." And Maud laughed and pulled him back to her, and the lantern by the door burned low and gold. "And I'll close the door on them there, dear ones, because some warmth belongs to them and not to us." When the 9th turning moon rose the next night, full and white over the frozen north, it found them at the stone, the grey cloak, the right hand, the words her mother had left half-taught, and they had made whole between them. The keeper of the land and the lord of the wolves, both present, both hands on the oldest promise in the north, remaking it the way it was always meant to be made. And when it was done, the wolves came, the whole pack, out of the trees, into the moonlight. And this time, when they reached the fence, they did not lie down, and they did not turn away. They came through it. For the first time since the bargain was first sworn, the whole pack crossed together, invited at the keeper's own hand, not to hunt, never to hunt, but to gather around the two people at the stone. The whole great pack of the north pressing close and warm in the snow. And the sound they made was not a howl of hunger. It was the sound of something coming home. Chapter 7. Both sides of the fence. Here is what changed after the moon of the turn. The crack in the king's sovereignty closed. But not the way he'd thought it would when he rode out that first grey morning. He'd imagined he'd find some rival power on his land and break it, and take his wolves back, and rule whole again. Instead he found that the thing turning his wolves was his own oldest word, and that the way to make it whole was not to break it, but to keep it, properly, both hands, at the stone. His wolves obeyed him everywhere in the north again. And on Maud's land, they still would not hunt. Not ever. Because that was the bargain. And now the bargain was his as much as hers. Kept and known, and no longer a crack in anything. A king isn't undermined by a promise he himself is keeping. He's only undermined by one he's forgotten. Roald had stopped forgetting. Maud kept her land. That mattered to her, and he understood why it mattered, and he never once suggested she leave it to come and be a queen in a stone hall. The land was hers by right, hers before he came, hers after. And it was also now the single most important ground in the north, the place where the oldest promise was kept, and the keeper of that promise does not leave her post. So they made it work the way the bargain itself had always been meant to work. Both sides, present, together. He was a king with a hall to hold and a north to rule. She was the keeper of the wolf bargain and the mistress of her own ground. And the marks on the boundary stone had waited 800 years to be more than marks. And now the two lines they stood for were, at last, standing in the same place. You'll want to know about the fence that no wolf would cross, the fence Maud was mending the morning he rode up, the fence he'd held the rail of like a man doing the strangest thing of his life. They took it down. Not all of it. A farm needs a fence. But the stretch by the stone, the old line, the boundary the wolves would not cross, that came down, because there was no need of it any more. The wolves came and went now as friends of the ground, Ash chief among them, that great grey wolf who had crossed the fence on the very first day to lie at a farm woman's feet, and who had, it turned out, known before either of them what the two of them were to each other. Wolves are like that. They choose before the people do. They're just better at admitting it. You told me to hold this rail, Roald said, the day they took the old fence down. The first morning. Do you remember? I remember a rude man on a horse who wouldn't leave. You made the king of the north hold your fence rail before you'd give him your name. And you held it, said Maud. That's when I knew you might be worth feeding. A king who'll hold a fence rail for a stranger has something right in him. She looked at the gap where the boundary had been, the open ground where the two halves of her world, the farm and the forest, the land and the wolves, now ran together with nothing between them. There aren't two sides any more. That's the strangest part. My whole life there was my land, and there was their forest, and there was a line between, and I stood on my side and kept faith across it. And now there's no line, Roald said. He took her hand, the right one, the giving hand, in the open place where the fence had been. Just the ground, and the two of us on it, and a very large number of wolves who are, I'm told, extremely fond of you. They've better manners than their king. They do, Roald agreed. I'm learning from them. It's slow. Be patient with me. And Maud, mistress of the oldest ground in the north, keeper of a bargain 800 years deep, who had called it luck all her life and now knew it for what it was, looked at the king of the north holding her giving hand in the gap where the fence used to be, and decided she'd be patient with him for a very long time. Epilogue. The valley never quite worked out what had happened. They knew the king had taken up with the lucky woman from the farm by the trees, and they thought it a fine, strange story, the farm woman and the wolf king, and they were not wrong, but they had no idea of the size of it. They didn't know they were living beside the keepers of the oldest promise in the north. They only knew that the woman by the trees still never lost a beast, and that now the king himself was sometimes seen out there mending her fence like a common man, and that the wolves that had terrified the valley for generations had gone somehow, quiet, as if some old quarrel between the north and its wolves had been settled by two people at a stone, which is exactly what had happened, though no one would believe you if you told them. Maud taught it properly, in the end. That was the thing she cared most about, after everything. She would not let it be lost again, would not let another daughter stand guessing at a stone because the winter came too soon. She wrote the right down, all of it, the words and the nights and the grey cloak and the giving hand, and she kept it safe, so that whoever came after would have the whole of it and never have to learn their own mother's life from a stranger. And from then on, every 9th year, at the great turn, the keeper of the land and the lord of the wolves went out to the stone together, both hands on the oldest promise in the north, and remade it in full, never letting it fall to the small keeping again. Not because it would break if they didn't, though it would have, but because some bargains are worth keeping for their own sake, and some promises are better with two. That's the last page, and that's the diary, ladies. Now, let me tell you 2 true things before I let you go, because this one's built on real ground, and I think you should know how real. The first is the bargain itself. Across several old European traditions, people made offerings tied to wolves and livestock and protective spirits, hoping to keep predators off their herds. Some peoples believed the wolves answered to a lord of their own, that no wolf would take your beast unless that lord allowed it. And so they kept faith with him, made offerings at the turning of the year, a goat or a ram, and asked him to hold his wolves back. And some believed that if you forgot the rite, if you let it lapse, that lord would take offence and send the pack down on your livestock to punish the forgetting. Maud's bargain is a story, but the shape of it isn't invented. People truly lived by faiths like it. And the second true thing is Maud herself, a woman who owned her own land and answered to no husband for it. We're taught to think that couldn't happen back then. In parts of medieval Europe it could, and it did. An unmarried woman or a widow could, in many places, hold land in her own right, manage it, buy and sell, enter contracts, and defend her claim in a court of law. It varied enormously by place and period and class. But a single woman on her own ground, beholden to no man, was not impossible. History simply remembers far fewer of them than there were. Now tell me something. Her mother kept this farm safe her whole life and never told her daughter what she was doing. Meant to, ran out of time, and left her guessing. Was that a mother protecting her child from a heavy thing too soon? Or a mother who simply believed, the way we all do, that there'd always be more time? You can't say both. Pick one and tell me why in the comments. I read every single one. The next diary is already on my shelf. I'm Leora, your favourite voice when the subject is wolves. Signing off. Until the next story.